Hello and welcome once again. This Vassa time of retreat, which for me is pretty much the same all the year round. I'm fortunate to be able to practice in solitude, wherever that may be, and just follow this regular routine each and every day. Waking early for some meditation, a little chanting, going on Pindapata to receive alms, that is my food for my one meal a day, and then the rest of the time, pretty much nothing to do. To sit, contemplate the Dharma, practice meditation, that is what we refer to as samadhi, where we formally sit and allow our minds to settle, become calm and tranquil, and develop a focus of attention, bringing our consciousness to one meditation object. And maintain that for as long as it takes to allow that mental state to become absorbed in that meditation object, and therefore secluding you from other distractions. Other distractions, obstacles in meditation are much the same as those obstacles and distractions that get in the way of us achieving our goals and aims in all of our daily activities of body, speech and mind. They are wanting, desire, sensual desire, not wanting, aversion, lack of inclination, just laziness and tiredness, restlessness and worry and doubt. And when we come to a stage whereby in meditation we can be free or secluded from those hindrances, you see it is a very peaceful and calm, tranquil, blissful and pleasurable state of being. It isn't becoming, it is a state of being, a way of being present and fully aware in the moment, here and now, the present. Leaving all thoughts of the past behind us, memories which are unreliable, and all thoughts of the future in front of us which are just imagination and may not happen, aside for that period of time whilst we're in meditation. And this is my practice, which, having renounced worldly life such as family, friends, and of course relationships with friends, is time consuming. How often is it that a friend may say, oh, we haven't spoken for so long, we must get together more often, or oh, I must pick up the phone and catch up with so and so, or you write a long letter, well, in the olden days, or perhaps an email now, and you feel it has to be pages and pages because it was so long since you wrote the last time. All of this is occupying our attention, that awareness, that consciousness in, yes, indeed, pleasing others, but really ultimately to try and absolve or reduce our own ill will, aversion to the feeling that we haven't done something we feel we should have. And this brings me on to one of the first questions. In fact, it's one of the most recent, but I noticed it had come up from the viewer a second time, as I'm a little behind perhaps with replying to the comments, which is, how do I find it? I need to go to the most recent, and I was on the oldest. Right. Changing one's self is selfish, and becoming ARAHANT, whereas changing the life of others and the human system is a bodhisattva. And put another way, from the same viewer, Arahant is doing everything for himself, hence it's selfish, whereas Bodhisattva does much to change the misery of creatures and humans on the planet, hence he is better. So this person has made this comment twice, so clearly bestowing the virtues of the goal or aim of the Bodhisattva vow with regards to the goal or aim or intention to attain to Arahantship. Now this is no more clearly defined than in the commonly perceived difference between Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, or the southern school of Buddhism, Theravada, and the northern school of Buddhism, Mahayana. And it is my understanding, and not my I don't have any full knowledge or practice in the Mahayana traditions of the northern school, so it's just very limited, this view, that they take a bodhisattva vow. So their goal is to be able to help all sentient beings by their practice prior to them attaining to Buddhahood themselves. Whereas in the southern tradition, the Theravada tradition, it's commonly assumed that this is a selfish practice in that we just work on ourselves to become an arahant. So let's look at that more as it really is, as in what the Buddha said and what the Buddha did. The Buddha was a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva means a Buddha to be. So you don't become a Buddha to be by taking a vow. You just express the intention to become fully enlightened. Buddha means awake, to be awakened. And we refer to Siddhartha Gautama, the fully awakened Buddha, by this term Buddha. Now, on taking the bodhisattva vow, some perceive that as, well, you're forsaking the chance of arahantship for the sake of all others. Well, this is not the case. The Buddha was a bodhisattva in that during all of his countless previous lives, some of which were in contact with and in connection with previous Buddhas of countless eons, let alone, so incalculable amounts of time previous to this incarnation, this life, he had developed the qualities necessary to become a Sama Sambuddha, so a perfectly awakened one. That is, to become the Buddha, become enlightened without any teachings of Dharma around, to discover for himself. Perfectly enlightened, Sama Sambuddha. He was therefore already well on his way to awakening prior to this birth, and a bodhisattva. But this didn't stop him to strive to become free from suffering, as he was born into this human realm within this lifetime to attain to parinibbana, the final stage of enlightenment. And therefore the Buddha became the Buddha, because he was able, as the previous, what he was termed as the bodhisattva, becoming enlightened, to then, at the behest of Sahampati, one of the Brahmin gods, to teach others and share with all sentient beings, albeit it was not his intention to do so. He thought it would be too complicated for people to understand. But Sahampati came down, and it is said, was to speak to the Buddha, saying that there are those with little dust in their eyes. Now this, he didn't mean you have to go and convert the whole world to Buddhism, get on your preaching stool now and go out marching for the cause. No. There are those with little dust in their eyes. So those who clearly do not want to know, leave them alone. Those with all other ideas, other systems of belief, other practices of varying kinds of meditation, other systems of morality, let them be. If they come to you, all well and good. By the very example you're setting, they may well do that. But otherwise, let them be. There are a few with little dust in their eyes, meaning a few whom will be interested. Perhaps those of not such high intellect, often very much the people whom are less easy or find it harder to understand the simplicity of the teachings of the Buddha, are those with the highest, perhaps, levels of intellect through reading and study, because of course there is a lot more dust, let's say, we could call it, in their eyes, with all of this collection of information, which goes towards creating this, fifth, as I mentioned the 5 hindrances earlier, this fifth hindrance of doubt. Doubt in what the Buddha has to say. But this teacher said this teacher said that. I've read this, I've heard this, there's this example, and so on and so forth. This highly intellectual so-and-so wrote this amazing thesis on such and such. This must have some credibility because it's so well published and well read and so well thought of. But the Buddha's teachings are not of that nature. They're not intellectual. They are, in fact, experiential. The Buddha asks us not even to take his word for any of this that he teaches, but to go and practice yourselves the Noble Eightfold Path and see where it leads. And it does truly lead to. Anyone who's practicing it will be experiencing it leads to contentment. And from contentment you have happiness. Happiness being a symptom of contentment, just as sadness is a symptom of being discontent. So the Buddha was striving towards arahantship, as can you. Now this doesn't mean it is a selfish practice, because to answer the question that I read first was that how can it be, or something like that, you practice to be a bodhisattva, thus sharing everything and teaching everyone else, converting everyone else to Buddhism, rather than an arahant who's just doing it for themselves. So even the Buddha spent a good part of his life, 6 years of ascetic practices which were unsuccessful, but necessary for him to establish that that wasn't necessary. And then his vow sitting under the Bodhi tree to become enlightened and not move until he was, having taken some nourishment, but as a result of previous lifetimes and parami established to date, he became fully awakened through simply sitting, enjoying mindfulness of the breath, anapanasati, which he comes to teach us later on, and becoming the perfectly awakened one. And then being persuaded to go and teach, rather than just keep this to himself, went and taught first his former ascetic friends he'd set out with. His original teachers had since died, but some of the practitioners he'd started his journey with, having left the household life and then gone his separate way, he caught up with near the city of Varanasi in North India, where he taught the first teachings in Sarnath of the Dhammacakka Sutta, the teachings of the Four Noble Truths and the containing which is the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness and right concentration, but divided nicely into categories of sila, moral virtue, the 5 precepts, samadhi, meditation, and panya, wisdom, developing knowledge of the characteristics of existence, right view. So, the aspiration, even the vow, to be a bodhisattva is not apart from the aspiration, the intention to become an arahant. How can you teach others, how can you show others the way to arahantship which precedes Buddhahood without having worked on that path and attained to arahantship, or at least the first level of and stage of enlightenment yourself, made inroads on eradicating greed, hatred and delusion. You need to start with yourself first. This isn't selfish, but you cannot help others until you have helped yourself, because it's not a belief system you're passing down one to another. It is a practice, and the results can be found experientially, not just learnt to believe, in which case something can be passed down just like that. But if you haven't experienced contentment to yourself, how can you be expected to teach others the way towards contentment? So I hope that explains why I can understand the basis of your question, but it's a slight general misunderstanding that this is 2 separate ideas. It is also not selfish to wish to become free from suffering in this lifetime and free from rebirth. Albeit, in the Bodhisattva vow, it might be said that it can be considered as saying, I think, that they want to continue to be reborn in order to teach. Now, there is a problem with that. Each time you're reborn, you're starting again with the whole learning process, albeit the parami that have accrued and the karmic positivity, you're still going to have to physically grow up in a human body, have all of that suffering again, and hopefully have the opportunity to be exposed to Dharma, practice, become enlightened yourselves, and then keep working towards arahantship. Whereas if within this lifetime you are successful, you can set no better example to others without rebirth. Now, I began my practice listening to talks or reading biographies about or reading talks from arahants, fully attained monastics, monks, and even and nuns, and even lay persons who've attained to arahantship, reading their teachers, listening to their teachers, studying and understanding their biographies as to how they attained to that long after their deaths, without them being reborn. Their teachings have come to me in the West. So not even someone from their region, geographically, a long way away. Because they set such a good example, you see, in the practice, which has been passed on and helped to so many thousands, if not, yes, thousands and thousands and thousands of people in their own lives to come and practice towards enlightenment themselves. So they weren't necessarily born as being bodhisattvas time and time again, but their teachings continue. Those of Ajahn Mun, Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Longtar Mahaboa, my own teachers, Longpo Sumedho, Ajahn Anan, great Thai Forest masters of decades and decades, generations ago, through to the present day, whom, by striving to attain to freedom from suffering in this lifetime and setting that example, following the Noble Eightfold Path, show me, for one, it can be done. Otherwise I would not be sitting here now. And my goal is to become free from suffering in this lifetime like them, and free from future rebirth, leaving hopefully behind me an example at least of yet another person, being in the human realm, attaining to enlightenment and freedom from rebirth. And just on that, I read a comment which I haven't got here because it was too long, and I'm having to restrict the comments and questions only marginally, just a tiny bit. If they just go on for screens and screens, remind yourself when you're making these comments, if you have a comment, that's fine. I love to receive all comments, but the teachings of the Buddha are for those with little dust in their eyes. In other words, the stupid people like me. Yes, I'm not an intellectual, so I don't want to read other people's philosophies or even be directed towards others' philosophies. It's not that I'm narrow-minded or not open. Yes, it is. I'm not open to other suggestions. I've tried all that. I'm now 57 and this is what I've chosen to practice. And albeit others may be still shopping around, they can still do that here on YouTube. It's not for me to be discussing all of the variations that other people have. And I'm always going to come back to the simple practice of Sila Samadhi Panya, that all conditioned things are subject to change, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and out of our control, anatta, or not self. So outside of those parameters, it seems pointless for me to spend much time replying to long-winded background studies on various philosophies that may have preceded the Buddha or have come since the Buddha. I'm only interested in what the Buddha demonstrated to work, because I can see for myself it working experientially, without believing anything, without reading it in a book. So on that, the question was, how is it that the Buddha chose to come back to anapanasati to become enlightened? Well, you see, it isn't, oh, I'm going to go and do anapanasati, or I'm going to go and do metta, or I'm going to go and do body scanning. I hear this quite often. No. We're going to practice meditation. Yes, we're going to sit, trying to obtain samadhis and deeply absorbed stages of samadhi that lead to what we call jhanas, where you're completely secluded from those hindrances, and even the bodily feelings ultimately you cannot experience or feel or are aware of, and ultimately surrounding senses, things you may be seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and even what you think becomes so subtle that eventually you're left in complete peace, calm, tranquility, absorbed in jhana. And someone was referring to where I spoke of meditation being preceding the Buddha, which it does in India, or the Indian continent as it was divided up previously, in times long, thousands of years before the Buddha. They referred to the Buddha leaving his first teachers whom had attained to jhanas and going and practicing alone, but then coming back to anapanasati. And why was that? Well, attaining to jhanas is just a stage of samadhi, a stage of deeply absorbed meditation, which is a step towards freedom from suffering in this lifetime, or nibbana. We do need to do that. But the practices of some meditations, transcendent meditations, transcending meditations, or yogic practices, are to just attain that, not go any further, not to become free from suffering in this lifetime, not to become free from rebirth, but just to attain those deeply absorbed states. So that's where they stop. The Buddha went on to find many degrees higher and stages further than that. And he, just from past experience, again, experientially, came back to Anapanasati. He'd been trying all of the other ascetic practices for 6 years. And he thought, right, that's it. I must sit here now, spend a minute or two settling down, and I'm just going to watch the breath now, and I am not going to get up until I'm enlightened. Not in quite those words, but basically until he could see really clearly the answer, something that he could just really even put into words, but understand as the truth, which is where these Four Noble Truths come from. And he just sat and he watched the breath. And when his mind became sufficiently focused, this is where it all happens. Now, this can't really be described. It's been written down beautifully in prose, and there's poetry, there's paintings, there's artistic descriptions and pictorial representations of all of these kinds of events in the Buddha's lives, which are just there to remind us of the significance of it in an aesthetically pleasing way. And they help to draw our attention to the practice, but not there to create some form of belief system, as are a lot of the fables, the stories, the analogies and things that we hear and read in the suttas, which perhaps didn't directly come from the mouth of the Buddha, but have been added later on by commentators on his teachings. But what is there for us are these core teachings, and what to practice and how to become free from suffering in this lifetime through this practice. So he didn't sit down with a what am I going to do kind of meditation, because these are labels that have just come on in recent years, really. People call it metta meditation, call it. We're not even doing that. We're just developing the quality of metta, one of the Brahma Viharas, through our entire practice. The greatest gift we can give is keeping sila, but it's also a gift of metta, loving kindness, a gift of karuna, compassion, a gift of joy for others, mudita, and helps develop equanimity, upekkha. These are the 4 Brahma Viharas, which are the qualities we're developing within. Another comment said, with regards to those, maybe I'll come to it a bit later. If I get there, I should go back to the beginning. So there was a comment with regards to the Brahma Viharas, living as a Buddha. Oh, I see, yes, living as a Buddha and developing the Brahma Viharas. It wasn't quite worded in that way, the question. I was a little bit confused as to what they were asking. But they were giving an alternative comment to say, well, in that case, is it a case of to fake it until you make it? Or is that blasphemous? And well, it certainly isn't a case of faking it until you make it. Whatever that really means. It is a case of developing slowly these qualities of loving kindness, of compassion, of joy for others, and equanimity. And it becomes evident that you have developed those qualities as you do so. And this is moving towards being like a Buddha, being like the Buddha. So therefore setting an example that others can follow, but they're following it because they can see it in you already, as someone who's content and happy and kind. And we want to be around people like that. We want to be like people like that. We want to be like the Buddha. So this is by way of example as to how the Bodhisattva path still works within the Southern School of Theravada tradition, by setting the example through your own actions of body, speech and mind, this way you live of path of renunciation, or as a lay person, this path of practice of moral virtue, meditation and wisdom, to set the example for others to see, like and attach to it, and become a part of that practice, to experience for themselves the benefits of living that way. Right. Now, as I'm speaking, I keep thinking of other comments without reading the comments. I should just go through the comments. Oh, that's the act as a Buddha one, so we can leave that one for now. And then this one is, see, I copy or photograph, screenshot these comments before I sit down. And occasionally I get a glimpse and think, oh, that's interesting. And then they're in my mind. So when I start talking, they're coming up. And that's why I jump around a little bit. It's also why, if you write pages and pages and pages, I'm afraid I can't do it that way. I have to read the whole thing, find a question, but also find something that is useful for others. Because I've read it, I've replied. It's perhaps not always useful for others if it's just an argument about other traditions, other philosophies or other ideas. So it's important to make it practical. If you've got a question, I can certainly always find time to answer it, because that's not only helpful for others because they may have had similar questions in mind, but it also helps me to talk about the Dharma in a way that is useful to the people watching, people listening, which is the most important thing. Otherwise, I don't need to be doing this. So, yeah, is reduced the right word? Because, excuse my poor understanding of English, I'm still trying to learn it. Well, I think if you can understand this talk and this beautifully written comment here, you're speaking very good English, so don't worry about that. But transcended seems the correct word. You're going way beyond what most people could imagine. Although you say you understand about ego factor in Buddhism. So this could be maybe understanding. So what you're saying is, where I've used the word reduced, I think it was, now I don't know which video this was in connection with, even though you've kindly put the little timestamp thing there to, I don't go back and look at my videos, and like I've just said, I screen photograph the comment, and so I can't do that anyway. But I'm not going to start looking back over my videos to find what I was talking about in order to reply to the comment that is relating to it. So without a specific reference, it's hard. But I think this was where I said reducing the kilesas, the defilements of greed, hatred and delusion. I think I often use the word eroding is a more appropriate word. A little bit like rocks in a tumble dryer, not a tumble dryer, but a tumbling barrel being rolled around, getting smoother and smoother until they're smooth, rounded pebbles. It's that kind of action, abrasive action, to erode and eventually eradicate the defilements of greed, hatred and delusion. So it isn't transcendence. It's only transcendence as far as in meditation, in jhanas, you are secluded from the hindrances. You're secluded from the bodily feelings and the mental emotions. This is to some extent a transcendent state, a trance, if you like, or you have ascended above that, which is physical feelings and mental emotions. However, when you finish this absorbed state of meditation, you come out of jhana, out of samadhi, you still have those kilesas, they're still there. So they have not been transcended, only momentarily in that meditative state. Whereas throughout practice of Sila Samadhi Panya, throughout all of our daily activities and the way we live, we're gently grinding down those sharp rocks to smooth pebbles. We're smoothing down eroding our defilements of greed, hatred and delusion, eventually eradicating them. So it isn't a transcendent process, it's a reducing process, which is why that word is more appropriate, and transcendence is appropriate in another context. Now, I do appreciate you did say that you don't speak English as your mother tongue, so this is quite difficult even for me as an English only speaking person. So I do understand where the confusion comes from, but I think you're undervaluing your linguistic skills, really. To come up with a question even shows that you should have a very good command of the English language. And yes, on that note, I did have a comment again about subtitles. How can I put them on? Well, I don't do anything to these videos. YouTube do that. You go to settings when you're watching the video, any video I think this is, settings, and then it's not called subtitles for some reason, it's called captions. I don't know why. So settings, it took me a long time to work this out. Settings, captions, and then you just choose your language. So if it's Hindi, you pick Hindi, and lo and behold, Hindi of what I'm saying comes up. How accurate it is, I have no idea, because I only speak English. And unfortunately, I don't think they do Sinhalese. Maybe it's a good thing, I'm not sure. Or maybe they do if you're in, well, I'm in Sri Lanka, but I haven't tried. And maybe it goes on what your Google account is linked to or something like that. And then another, just on that note, YouTube sort of question about adverts, asking me if I could switch them off at the beginning. I don't suppose it matters at the end, because you could just you go to another video, don't you? So I had to look at this, because I have switched off all adverts. They're off, that's it, as best I can do. But I did look at it, because someone said, but some other Dharma talks they listen to don't have adverts. So I signed in as not on my account, so just a guest, if you like, and because I have YouTube Premium, so I get no adverts, because in Asia YouTube Premium is something like it's less than a couple of dollars or couple of euros or couple of pounds per month, which in terms of the data usage consumed by watching adverts more than pays for itself. I'm not advertising or selling this YouTube Premium to you, because I know it's very much more expensive in other countries, but in this country and in India it's pennies per month. And also I wouldn't be able to listen to Dharma talks if they were interrupted by adverts, because they would be a lot of them inappropriate, and I'd be forever having to skip through them, if you know what I mean. So I understand where you're coming from. Now I looked at this, and what happens is this is not anything to do with me, I understand, so I hear, apparently it's the algorithm or something, but I too watched a couple of other Dharma talks, there were no adverts, went to mine and there were no adverts before it. So I signed out, went back in again, and then the reverse was the case. So I think it just, have you seen an advert for a while or not? And they come up if you don't have YouTube Premium. So I don't think it actually applies. The person putting the video here doesn't have much say as to what goes on either side of their video, only what's within it. And on that point, I should answer this one question, comment, because I think it's been around for some time. How do beliefs influence our observations? And how do our observations shape our beliefs? So I don't know, because, oh, hang on. In other words, what is the relationship between belief and observation? So I don't know, because as a practicing Buddhist, or a Buddhist practitioner, and as a Buddhist monk, someone who's renounced worldly life and dedicated my life to this practice, with our teacher, the Buddha, his teachings, the Dharma, and the Sangha, of which I've become a part of, we don't have beliefs. So not believing anything, I don't need to be concerned with as to how it shapes our observations. If I was to believe, have blind belief, for instance, that all my observations would be, yes, of course, directly affected. So if I blindly believed that God provided this shelter for me here, I would look either admirably at God's work or critically at God's work. Therefore, my observations would be affected directly. But as I don't believe that this is the result of anyone other than hard-working supporters of the Sangha, Upasakas and Upasikas, I can look at it with the observations that this is just generosity in manifestation, a manifestation of generosity and kindness to support my practice. So I hope that answers that last and final question clearly enough for you. Be happy and stay well until next time. Sukhi Hotu.